Hi, Ozzy here. Yesterday I watched a video on the subject of Pascal's Wager. It was uploaded by Dillahunty, host of the Atheist Experience show. And I'm happy to recommend that video to you because it explains what Pascal's Wager is very clearly, how it's used in everyday discussions by the average theist, what's wrong with it, and the video even addresses the more sophisticated manner in which its originator, Blaise Pascal, applied the argument. So I'm happy to recommend that video, and I hope that theists of all stripes who are sympathetic to Pascal's Wager as an apologetical argument will watch that video and have a long think about it. So I'm including a link to it in the description box. In this video, though, I want to put forth an objection to Pascal's Wager, which I think many people have a sense of and are sometimes groping toward, but have difficulty articulating. The deepest problem with Pascal's Wager, as I see it, is that it mischaracterizes belief as if it were a course of action. It makes perfect sense to evaluate the advisability of a course of action on the basis of the stakes or the consequences of acting on a belief. For instance, if I have to walk to work and I notice that the storm clouds are brewing and it might rain that day, I should weigh the benefits and the costs of lugging an umbrella with me all day against the possible outcomes, that it will rain or that it won't rain. My decision to bring an umbrella or not will rest largely on what I think the consequences will be under the condition that it will rain and under the condition that it won't rain. If I judge that getting wet will be a minor inconvenience, I might risk not bringing an umbrella so as not to be encumbered by an umbrella all day, and if I think that the rain will leave me cold, wet, and damp and miserable all day long, the inconvenience of carrying an umbrella is outweighed by the fact that it will keep me warm and dry and that I'll have peace of mind even if it doesn't rain. So the consequences will and should dictate what I decide to do. What I decide to do. Whatever I happen to believe about whether it will rain or not. But it would be a stupidity to try to arrive at a conclusion about the veracity or falsity of the proposition, "it will rain today," based upon a consideration of the consequences of my going out that day, with or without an umbrella. Let's imagine another scenario. Imagine someone asks me, "Ozzy, is there oil on your land?" Well, how should I decide that? How should I answer that? Well, there are many things I could do to help me answer such a question. I could learn some geology. I could consult an expert in the field whose job it is to identify likely sources for drilling oil. But would it make sense to try to answer the question, does oil exist beneath my property, by entertaining the following considerations? If I drill and there's oil, I will enrich myself. If I drill and there's no oil, I will impoverish myself. And if there's no oil and I don't drill, I'll neither gain nor lose anything. But if there is oil and I don't drill, I'll be forsaking a fortune waiting to be had. Does that make sense? Well, it's clear from this example that the consequences are relevant to whether or not I should drill, which is a course of action. But those consequences are not relevant to answering whether or not there is, in fact, oil beneath me right now. So if you ask me, "Ozzy, do you believe the proposition, there is oil beneath you right now?" There are many things I could do to help me reach a conclusion. But even if I had no information, no experts to consult, absolutely no way to answer such a question, my evaluation and assessment of the truth or falsity of that proposition should not be informed by a consideration of the benefits and the costs that would result from drilling or not drilling. The evaluation of the consequences of my drilling or not drilling in no way furnishes me with evidence or information that would warrant a rational belief about the presence or absence of oil beneath me right now. Such considerations are quite literally irrelevant. They are beside the point to the truth of any belief I might have about the existence or non-existence of oil beneath me, even though they'd be highly relevant in determining a course of action whatever I might conclude on that matter. To have a belief is to believe that some proposition, call it P, is true, or to affirm that P is the case. A belief is a willingness, a disposition to affirm or assert or think or opine that P is the case. That's all a belief is. Now, unless it's somehow the case that the consequences, positive or negative, the consequences of believing something somehow constitute the truth conditions that make the proposition P true or false, well, then there's no way that the consequences of believing something can possibly be a relevant factor in the evaluation of the reasons for thinking a proposition is true or false. As such, where the veracity of a proposition is concerned, and remember, veracity is what beliefs are concerned with. Where the veracity of a proposition is concerned, the stakes or consequences to you of being correct or mistaken in your beliefs can't even be a relevant consideration in your determination of whether the proposition is true or false. What one believes is certainly very relevant to which courses of action it makes sense to undertake. And so, when evaluating competing courses of actions, we do and should take into consideration the consequences of our actions. That is, the foreseeable gains and losses one might incur, whichever course of action one undertakes. It's precisely such consequences, the costs, the benefits, the gains, the losses, which make it matter to us that we have accurate beliefs in the first place. But they don't decide the truth of questions for us. Now, what we believe will determine our courses of future actions, to be sure. And further, all sorts of prior mental actions, such as the exercise of good and bad reasoning, reading, conversation, experiments, hypothesis testing, all of those things go into the formation or acquisition of a belief. But that doesn't mean that a belief is itself a course of action. Rather, your belief is just what you sincerely and genuinely think is the case. It's how reality seems to you. That's not an action. That's a result. It's a product. It's an output. Our beliefs are, at least in part, the result of prior mental acts, to be sure, such as good or bad reasoning. And they will, in turn, influence our subsequent actions. But beliefs are not themselves actions. Naturally, when the costs or consequences of being mistaken are very great, we want to ensure we have good reasons and evidence for whatever conclusions we come to believe. And this is why when you buy a house, it's a good idea to have a house inspector before signing the deed. It's why when we buy a car, it's wise to bring it to a qualified mechanic before we take ownership of it. The greater the stakes, the more sense it makes to insist upon a higher standard of evidence before one acts on a belief. So the stakes are relevant to how we calibrate our standard of evidence, how high we set the bar, how low we set it, before we act on a proposition that we take to be true. And we can even accept a proposition as true, yet not be prepared to act upon it if the stakes are high or if we think the evidence is not especially good. We can, as they say, be very guarded in our beliefs, believing something to be true, but not very confident under certain conditions. Let me give you an example. I'm very confident that if I flip a fair coin 20 times right now, I won't get 20 heads in a row. I'm prepared to wager a lot of money on that because I believe that, well, I believe that proposition is true. I believe it with great confidence. But there's a limit to my confidence. I wouldn't bet my very life on it. Those stakes are too high. Accepting a bet, that's a course of action. I believe sincerely and genuinely that if I flip this coin 20 times right now, it won't come up heads 20 times in a row. I'm extremely sure of that. There are few things I believe so confidently as this. And yet, if the stakes are high enough, I won't take that bet. I won't wager my life, even though I think it's true that if I did it right now on that run, I wouldn't get 20 heads in a row. When there's a lot at stake, you really should be insisting on a higher standard of evidence than when there's little at stake, simply to minimize your losses and maximize your gains. The stakes or the consequences are relevant to when you decide to act upon a belief and how you decide to act upon a belief. But the stakes are in no way the criteria that you should be considering for whether the proposition in question is true or not. To admit that the stakes are relevant to where one sets one's standard of evidence for the purposes of action is not to say that the stakes should dictate what your conclusion about the truth of the matter should be. And the truth of the matter, that's what a belief is about. A belief is what one thinks is the case. And that's not rationally determinable by a consideration of the stakes, no matter how high they are or how low they are. So, in summary, Pascal's wager treats belief like it's an action, as if having a belief in the proposition God exists is itself a course of action. That's not what a belief is. Beliefs are in part the products of prior mental acts, to be sure, and they inform our subsequent actions, but they are not themselves actions. And Pascal's wager encourages and even insists that we reach a conclusion regarding the veracity of a proposition based on what impact being correct or mistaken will have on us. But that's strictly irrelevant to the truth. We don't and shouldn't decide on the veracity of whether it's going to rain or not on the basis of whether or not we'll get wet. The consequences matter for what we will do, how we will act, like bring an umbrella or not. But they shouldn't and don't matter for what is to be believed to be the case. Okay, that's all for now. Thanks for watching, and I hope this helps. For what it is to be believed to be the case. Fuck, I read that wrong.